Thank you. So first off, this was meant to be a panel, but as only Stuart and I were actually available, this is going to be more of a fireside chat. Otherwise, it would just be an interview. So it's going to be really quite collegiate on how we do it. So I'm going to take you through a few slides, and then Stuart and I will have a chat. But Stuart, if you could take a moment and just introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Stuart Harris. I'm founder and chief scientist at Red Badger. I'm passionate about open source software. I'm a core maintainer on a open source software project for building mobile applications with Rust, which we announced in this building a year ago, which is going really well. So open source, and we've built our company on open source, and all our clients are building their companies on open source. It's like, part of our DNA. But I'm also passionate about sustainability and really, really interested in next generation platforms for running enterprise software in data centers and at the edge. So yeah, that's me really.
Thank you. And my name is Annette Giardina, and I'm the Chief Sustainability and Innovation Officer at OpenUK UK. And as you might guess from the title, I'm pretty passionate about sustainability, and I've been involved with OpenUK now for around 2 years. And OpenUK in itself has been a strong supporter of OpenUK for many years now. And my colleague Chris Lloyd-Jones helped author the data center report that OpenUK did. So we've been working together with Omar and Amanda on the UN Data Center Challenge, which we're going to take you through today. So this is a bit of a new one, because essentially at KubeCon, which is happening in Paris in March, and it's also a Cloud Native conference, they're going to have an inaugural hackathon. And that hackathon is going to be focused on the UN SDG. So for those of you who don't know, the UN has created 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And when we talk about sustainability, a lot of people get their minds focused on carbon. But in reality, there's quite a lot within that, everything from ending food poverty to inclusion and diversity, gender equality, quality of life, etc. So this hackathon is focused on that. And the UN has come up with, along with their partners, has come up with a number of different categories. It's in collaboration with the UN Office of Information and Communication Technology. And if you want to do the hackathon, you do have to register for the conference, but if your application gets accepted as part of the hackathon, you will get conference attendance for free. So just an important thing to note. The timeline, the applications are due on the February 19th at 07:45 CET. Very bizarre deadline, but hey, we'll go with it. People will be notified on the 27th, the teams will be announced on the 28th, and then the hackathon to the 19th to the 21st, and the winners are announced on the main stage. Now, importantly, in addition to the winners getting on the main stage, there are going to be there's 12,000 people registered for the conference so far. But first place, you get $10,000 to put towards your idea. Second place, $7,500, and third place, $2,500. So if it's something that you're passionate about and you want to put a team together, or just go there on your own or work with another set of colleagues, it could be multi-company, it doesn't have to just be one person or one firm. So there's 10 challenges. We're not going to take you through all of them, so don't get too panicked. Challenge 1 is comment cleaner. And the SDGs it's addressing are gender equality and reduced inequalities. And the idea behind this one is it's coming up with open source software that people can use to basically filter out hate and filter out nasty speech on social platforms, on AI, etc. Challenge 2, the ones in blue, are the ones that OpenUK is co-sponsoring with the UN. So heat redirection, and we're going to talk a bit more about these four. So sustainable cities, zero hunger and affordable clean energy, building repurposing, heat reuse and data challenge, and the circular supply chain, which is a really broad topic. And then the other 5, volunteer computing for the SDGs, which is being sponsored by the UN. AI FOSS, which is framework for open software standards for AI. The Open Challenge for community empowerment. How can we use open source software to actually help drive community empowerment and help connect communities? A walking safety map. So how can you help people plan out routes so that if they're walking in an unknown city or they're walking in a neighborhood they don't really know, it's a safe route for them? And then online safety map, and this is designed to kind of look at how you can find the right sites, again, to kind of make sure that you're not getting exposed to hate and or prejudice. So those are the 10 main challenges. Now what Stuart and I are going to do is talk through the four ones that are for OpenUK. And I'm not going to take you through all these, but essentially the first one we'll talk about is heat redirection. Now, what we're going to do with this one is we're also going to talk about heat reuse and data challenge at the same time, because they're very interwoven. So we're just going to have a bit of a chat about it. So heat redirection is about how you monitor heat generation in data centers and then direct that heat towards applications that can use that heat, which we'll talk about in a second. And then heat reuse is about how you can use that heat and how you can come up with applications that will help you use that heat. So I'm going to take a seat with Stuart, and we'll talk about these two challenges. So Stuart, I know you're really passionate about the whole concept of being able to use heat redirection and energy from data centers.
I am, because I think we've got to the point where we've actually become very comfortable with how easy and accessible the cloud is for us to build applications. We think that disk space is free, that compute is almost free, memory is free, etc. And the internet never forgets. Things stay around forever, and the cost of that, in monetary terms, is minimal. I mean, people do spend a lot of money in the cloud, but the cost to the planet from a sustainability perspective is ridiculous, actually. I did hear a statistic that said that Ireland is a good place for data centers, and if all the data centers that come online, the scheduled to come online before 2030 do, then they'll be using a third of Ireland's electricity consumption, which is a ridiculous amount. I mean, data centers, like 5% of the world's, or pushing towards 5% of the energy consumption within the world, and networking another 3 or 4% on top of that. It's crazy, and we've got to the point where we build microservices in the cloud in Kubernetes, and we're very wasteful with that, right? We have underutilized machines. Nodes that are sparse, really, from a compute perspective, that aren't being used. The amount of embodied carbon in a data center server, can account for 40% of that machine's overall, carbon footprint throughout its life. And we're not using these machines anywhere nearly as, not pushing them as hard as we should do. So yeah, I'm really passionate about it.
So tying it back to the challenges, so the one challenge is about how we can reuse that. And the other challenge is around how you can almost set up a control tower to help identify where you could reuse that heat. And I know we have a colleague in OpenUK who's doing something really similar already. Green.
Yeah, deep green.
Green.
So I'm not sure if you remember, there was a big splash in the press about a year ago, it feels like, a bit longer maybe, where a guy, Mark Bjornsgaard, who's an ex-colleague and a friend of mine, set up a company called Deep Green to effectively reuse the heat from data centers to heat local swimming pools. In the UK, I think the 400 or so swimming pools have closed down, and especially with the energy prices the way they have been, it's been very difficult for them to stay economically viable. And what his company does basically is he just takes the machines, the compute boards, mostly HPC, high performance computing, immerses them in mineral oil, and then uses the mineral oil to transfer the heat to heat a swimming pool. So they have a data center in Exmouth swimming pool has been running for a year, that's doing exactly that, and it keeps that swimming pool warm for 60%. So it's basically 60% cuts their fuel bill by 60%. And they've just had a lot of funding from Octopus Energy to literally drive that concept throughout the UK, to literally direct the heat from the machines into the swimming pools.
So these two challenges, the idea behind them is that they're looking for people to hack through software that will be able to take a concept like deep green and use the software to say, how can we either redirect that heat or how can we actually repurpose that heat? So, the idea of immersing a data center underneath a swimming pool so that you can heat that pool is just one idea. But what if you took that further and you use that to heat a building, or you use that to, power your building? So these two challenges are about how you take the energy that gets output from a data center and repurpose that energy to do good. So it could be something like you're using that heat to heat barns on a farm, to keep the cows warm. So how can you do it? And so the idea behind these two hackathons is how you repurpose that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the main idea is that it's easier to move the data and the program to where the heat is required than it is to move the energy to take that heat somewhere else. Or to move the heat is harder. It's easier to bring the compute to where it's needed. And you can imagine, there's a big drive in this country to get everybody to replace their boilers and stuff with heat pumps, and there'll be community heating schemes and all sorts of things with, hopefully, over the next decade, where you can imagine at the end of your street there's a central heat source which is heating all the homes in the road. With pipes under the street. This would be like an amazing thing, and you can imagine that heat source being a small data center, especially with the push to the edge that we're seeing all over the place. I can imagine. Well, the cloud is definitely becoming more and more distributed. We need to get to the point where we can contribute compute from anywhere and build our applications on a layer above all of that.
Which leads us really well into the next challenge.
Okay.
So one of the other challenges that's being sponsored is building repurposing. And this one's actually a really interesting one, because the idea here is that how do you identify potential centers for edge computing? And then how do you use software to actually take that and move it forward? So for instance, if you look at the City of London, there's new buildings going up all the time. There's a lot of empty space. And especially after lockdown, I know our company had 5 offices in central London prior to lockdown. We now have 1 because we just consolidated down all those spaces. And most of those spaces that we left are sitting empty, right? So how do you help put together software, a technology stack, that is going to help you identify that, but then also utilize that? So if you imagine, if I'm running an office and I need to use computing, I could have a data center sitting in the bottom of my office that's licensed to Microsoft. But I'm taking that energy from that data center and I'm using it to heat my office, or cool my office, or power my office. And where I find it really interesting is, and it's not necessarily in the brief, but I think the brief is written widely enough that you can probably read some things into it, is if you think about the concept of smart buildings, hybrid buildings, which we personally do a lot of work around, where you've digitally twinned, you've used something like Metricus to digitally twin your office space, and then you've tied all of your heating, lighting, etc. into that, and then you using that repurposing back. So it knows that there's only 15 of us in this room, so it adjusts the air conditioning down, because it doesn't need to work as hard, instead of it pumping out cold air and freezing us all, right? So how do you look at how people can find locations for edge computing? And how do you do a hackathon around that? Do you want to add anything to that one, Stuart?
Well, only that the first, when when Deep Green talk about like data centers in swimming pools and stuff, the first question that comes up in everyone's mind is, but how can you secure, like how can you secure your data in that environment? And you can imagine that lots of disparate or repurposed locations, the security angle is quite important. In my opinion, it shouldn't necessarily be, I mean, like, so long as it's, biometrically secure area or whatever, then, there are different levels. I don't understand, you probably understand more about it than I do, you will do. The idea that your applications can run anywhere and they don't know where they're running, and you could literally shut that data center off with a digger through a fiber optic cable or something, and nobody would even notice because all the workloads are transferred automatically into other places. I think the security, the security angle is absolutely 100% important, but yeah, it's an angle that needs to be thought about in this challenge, I think.
And so I think, for this hack, it's all about how you can do that. So it could be you're looking at it from a security angle. It could be you're looking at it from a way to identify spaces. It could be you're looking at it as a way to actually use the energy or the heat that comes out of that, yeah? And then the last challenge that we're sponsoring, and the one I think probably has the broadest scope for people to do some hacking in, is the circular supply chain. So forgive me if I'm teaching anybody to suck eggs, but the concept behind a circular supply chain is we have currently, a lot of businesses have a supply chain where you build it and then it gets thrown away. And the idea behind a circular supply chain is how do you build that virtuous circle that things get reused. And so it's everything from now, this is specifically related to data centers, so it's a bit of a weird one. But it's how do you think about how you can make what is coming into your data center and coming out of your data center circular. Now, that could be things like your suppliers. It could be things like how do you make sure that the kit that you're putting into your data centers has come from a responsible supplier and that kit is reusable or recyclable. But it could also look at, what they're looking at here is how do you manage the life cycle of those critical components? And how do you look at how you can reuse and repair rather than throwing away? And how can you recycle? So it's a pretty open one, and I think you could read quite a lot into how you want to do it. But it's also, because this is where it becomes really open, consider how the principles and mechanisms you develop could be adapted to other supply chains. So you might be starting with it in the data center, but think about how it could be related to your own kit. So for instance, at Avanade, we started a thing during lockdown because I called up our COO because a local school was asking for computers, old computers. And so we started a thing during lockdown. We work with a charity that takes all of our old kit, wipes it, repurposes it, sells it, and then uses that money to buy new kit, which goes to schools that need computer software, computer hardware. So there's lots of different ways you can recycle and reuse and do some good. So this one's all about that circular supply chain and how we have responsible consumption. Stuart, you want to add anything to this one?
Well, only the embodied carbon in the equipment that goes into data centers is like astonishingly high. And if that can be amortized over a longer period by reusing the hardware and potentially in a different capacity, in a different, doing a different job, I could imagine like different priorities of workload. It's not as important that this thing runs fast. It just needs to run, and so let's run it on older hardware that so we can amortize that embodied carbon a little bit longer. I think is part of this.
I think the other one.
Has that been done now? Film manufacturers have got.
I'm sure.
Need to recycle their own equipment. I thought that's been ruled.
Yeah, well, no, I'm sure it has.
It's been brought in as a law in the EU. But not necessarily in other places. But the point behind this one is how do you figure that out? How do you maximize the reuse and the recycling? And how do you focus that on your critical components? But you're absolutely right. It became a law in the EU last year. But it's actually only tied to certain kit. So it's not everything. So it's things like fridge freezers and washing machines, and it has to be cheaper to repair than to buy new, is actually the essence of the law. But the other thing that's interesting in this one is the track your transportation miles and packaging solutions. So if you look at, we do a lot of work around field service, and one of the two biggest costs on field service are the kit on vans and the gas, the energy that's spent on those vans. So a lot of your software solutions are about how do you maximize your route so that you have the least driving time between repairs, but also how do you keep your van stock as low as humanly possible. And then that ties into, for instance, if you've digitally twinned your kit in your data center and you get information coming back from IoT, you can figure out what's broken, and you only bring the 3 parts you need, as opposed to bringing every single thing you might need. So as we move more towards reuse and repair, it's going to become actually quite prevalent to have good transportation networks, not just for the initial kit, but for the repair of that kit and how you recycle that kit. Okay, so those are the 4 challenges we're sponsoring. There's the other 6. And what we're trying to do is encourage people from OpenUK, one, to go to KubeCon and Cloud Native, but also to participate in the hack, because it would be absolutely fantastic if we could have OpenUK members winning some of these awards and getting up on stage. And the money behind the prize is there to help take the idea and put it into motion. Importantly, unfortunately, Omar couldn't be here today because he's at another conference. But Omar is the head of strategy for open source at the UN. He reports directly into the Secretariat. And he's the one who's come up with this challenge and talked to KubeCon and Cloud Native about getting it set up alongside their conference. So he's looking for ideas that the UN can sponsor and fund to help drive through the SDGs. So hopefully that gave you some insight. And if you guys have any questions, by all means, ask them, and we'll try to answer them.
Does anybody have any? Yeah.
There is not so as a question as a suggestion. So you talk about the security when we have these small installations which make it to use on site. And if you know, there is a French company which name is Carnot, which making just computing. So no storage. They just divide parts of the computing, and there is no any security issue because you just make a part of compute and give back the results of computing. So no issue with some leakage of information, etc. Yeah. And at the same time, you can turn off that anytime and turn on anytime. So the same can be applied for the AI, because AI is also like a blockchain, crypto mining. You're just making, computing, anytime when you need, and anytime when you don't need, can shut down. So this is turn on, turn off approach, which is perfectly fit for heat reuse.
And it's a really good point, because I think, you know, as there's part of me that's a cynic that says that as we distribute out these big data centers, aren't we just kind of going back to on-premise computing? But if you think about how this is going to work in the future, you'll probably see more of that separation, where you may have data sitting in big centers, which is secured, but your compute may be sitting in distributed centers. And those two things can be separate but connected. Any other points or questions anybody would like to raise? Well, I think we are just about at time. So thank you all for coming. And hopefully it was helpful. And hopefully some of you will sign up. And just in case you want to, you need to take a picture of this UPC code or go to that location and sign up for this session. And if you need to come up closer to get a proper picture, by all means, feel free to do so. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.